So today I was working on my 3D printer. That piece of crap you see back there looks like it broke. Got me thinking, this is my second out of three 3D printers that has just totally broken out on me. Just totally busted. Power supply broke, started smoking. Frankly, don't run those things in your house when you're not around because it might be a fire hazard. So just, the technology's not quite there yet. So sitting here working on my 3D printer. I don't know nothing about engineering. I don't know nothing about fixing this thing. So I started thinking, what other technology is out there today that, honestly, hasn't quite cut it in the way that you wanted it to? And I quickly started thinking about this bad boy right here, VR. VR headsets. Look how fancy that looks. It's even got a frunk, right? Nothing goes in here. They haven't designed anything for this yet. So I started thinking, there's a lot of good games out there for this thing that made me feel like it's worth it. But there's even more of? Garbage games that make me feel like it's not worth it. So I gotta say, really, it's important to highlight the goods when it comes to VR because there aren't a lot of them. And I think the main reason for that is, unlike with 3D printing, which has obviously found a very important place in the hobby scene, i.e., Warhammer, printing miniatures, if you want to print mounts for your GoPros, there's a lot of ways that you can make 3D printing work. But it just seems like VR just hasn't quite found its niche yet. And I think a big portion of that is the fact that it doesn't really know how to function as a separate style of gaming. So you have Half-Life Alyx, that's a game that supposedly changed the landscape for VR. But really all that game was, it was an adaptation of regular first-person shooters into a VR framework. And it works, don't get me wrong, I played the crap out of that game and all of its subsidiary workshop items and all that. It's a great game. It's a great license and a great IP in the Half-Life universe and everything. It works great. But frankly, it's still just a regular game shoved into the VR framework. And I think that's kind of where a lot of games seem to fail when it comes to the VR standard. But there's a few games that have really, really kind of stood out to me as really taking advantage of what VR is capable of. And those games are the ones that really make you feel like you are a protagonist in a video game or a movie or something like that. When you play a game, you want it to be a somewhat power fantasy. And one of the problems with VR is that it feels so limited. You don't get that power fantasy that you get in a lot of other games. There's a few VR games that try to do that, such as Wizards or Megaton Rainfall, that they try and give you a little bit of that power fantasy, but it's so clunky at the end of the day that you feel like a retarded version of Iron Man, if anything. You don't really get that full on power fantasy mode. But then there are other games that take the platform, this VR platform, and really take it to new heights and give you that fantasy because they understand the limitations of the VR setup. This is my space. I've got probably 4 feet by maybe 6 feet on the other side. This is maybe standing room VR, and still this game lets me get that power fantasy. And that game is Pistol Whip. Pistol Whip, Pistol Whip, however you want to pronounce it, doesn't matter. It's Pistol Whip VR, right? And I'll start playing the footage now because you need to see it to really understand what I'm talking about here. And this is a game that doesn't only make you feel powerful in a way that other first-person shooters can't do because you feel so engrossed in the experience. It's a game that actually physically exhausts you to the point that you feel like you're actually working to get that power fantasy. And it really feels good about it. So when you're playing this game, you have either one or two handguns. I prefer to go the one handgun route because I have done shooting in the real world, right? Like I've been to the gun range, I have a few handguns. And dual wielding, it doesn't really work in the real world. Maybe some super trained, super great assassins can do it. But generally speaking, I play this game in a way that makes me feel as if it's the ultimate expression of what I could do as a real human being. And it puts that ultimate expression to a specific soundtrack. And the soundtracks in this game are, heart pounding, just thumping. The songs, they kind of go really well with the combat. And that's the thing that's best about this game is that you really get into a rhythm when you're playing it. And in the same way that when you see the John Wick movies, it feels like he's in a rhythm when he does his combat, right? I think that's the most important thing about kind of giving you that power fantasy is getting you into a rhythm where it feels like you're actually accomplishing something that you couldn't do in the real world. And this game does exactly that. You get into a rhythm, it puts you into a beat, kind of in the same way that Guitar Hero would. It does it with a gun, it does it against, overwhelming odds, and it doesn't do it easy either. It took me probably 3 or 4 solid sessions before I was able to beat one game on hard mode, and I still haven't even been able to beat a hard mode game perfectly. I don't have 100% completion yet. I've barely gotten an A rating at the end of the game. But frankly speaking, it's the kind of game that makes you want to keep playing the same way that Guitar Hero did back in the day. Guitar Hero, they had their controllers, and that's what made that game the game that it was, because it understood how to use these extra pieces of equipment to make it a more immersive experience. And in that same way, Pistol Whip takes your VR headset and puts you into the experience of being a John Wick style shooter. And it's not just the fact that it's quick and that you have overwhelming odds, it's also the way that the world looks. It's all neon colored, it's all kind of flashing and moving in a weird way that you wouldn't expect, in the way that you feel when you watch one of the bullet hell movies. And because the environment kind of reacts to the way that you are moving, and the enemies are based on the music, you get this feeling that you are part of this greater narrative. Even though there isn't a particular narrative in the actual game, yes, the levels kind of string together, you can kind of put something together at the end of the day, but there isn't a specific narrative. It's just bite-sized pieces that make you feel like a powerful individual fighting through insurmountable odds to finish the job, basically. And it's a kind of a great lesson in what VR games should be. I have an early review 4 years ago or something like that of a game called Drift that I reviewed on my Samsung VR headset, and that game kind of understood the same that this game does, but it was much more limited because it was on the Samsung VR headset, which was a cell phone. So it really was where you're just flying through using your motion to guide yourself through an obstacle course. This game is almost the same thing, but it uses full body motion. It uses the gun so you can clear the obstacles ahead of you. And on top of that, it still has the physical movement. Although I do think that on hard mode, that physical movement might actually be the weakest point. There's every once in a while these pillars that show up that you have to kind of dodge. And it's okay because they built it into the music. But for a situation like this where I only have barely any movement with standing room, it makes it much more difficult because it really requires you to jump one way and jump the other. But overall, it gives you the feeling of this kinetic movement, this energy that other VR games don't have, which is one of the things that Half-Life Alyx I think suffered from. Was if you use the locomotion option that you just teleport, it breaks the reality of it. And then if you use the actual movement option, it doesn't give you the option to make it move faster, so it feels like you're always kind of walking really slow. And that's fine because it's part of how the experience was built. But again, that's what makes that game feel like it was just a regular first-person shooter ported over to VR very well, but still just ported over. It wasn't a game that felt differently designed for this intense new technology that's out there. You're right. So whereas Half-Life Alyx VR felt like it was more of a walking simulator with a little bit of gunplay in it, this game feels like it's specifically a holodeck simulation where you feel out of your body for a minute and you're going through this intense experience that the harder the difficulty gets, the more you feel like you're actually learning how to control your body and you're actually learning how to follow the beat and the cadence of combat, which is something that other games don't do. So I have to say that Pistol Whip VR, even with the Valve Index, it's been around for a while. You can play it on any of the other headsets. This one in specific is one of those games that I constantly find myself coming back to. This one, along with maybe Pavlov, are the kinds of games that really show you the possibilities of VR, and it feels very much like it was designed around this VR concept, and it brings you out of your world, and it's this new world that they've created here. And frankly, there's a lot of people that are looking for that VR app, that VR game, that they can put the VR headset onto somebody else and show them as this is what VR, the future of VR is. And this is that game. On easy mode, I think anybody put it on, give them one controller. They don't even need two controllers, so it's not that complicated. Just give them the right-handed controller or left-handed or left-handed, but they have the one weapon to use, and then just basically they dance their way to victory with a gun in their hand. And there's no other VR game that kind of recreates that feeling. By the end of it, you're actually kind of sweating. It feels like you did a workout, like you actually had an intense moment. And it's that kind of visceral reaction that I think VR needs to focus more on, that it doesn't seem to do right now. There's a few games that do it, a few horror games and stuff like that, but this is probably the most exciting game that's out there for VR right now. It's one of the few games that really, really sucks you in a way that other VR games aren't capable of doing. Yeah, it has some downsides. The soundtrack can feel repetitive. It's a very millennial soundtrack with a lot of heavy beats and bass drops and stuff like that. I wish, there was more of a random generator that you could bring in your own music, or maybe they had a higher variety of music. But this is one of the problems with VR in general, is that it's all small indie developers and they can only afford so much music, and they can only afford to license out so much music. So Beat Saber, as one of the more popular ones, obviously has more popular songs on it. This being a game that honestly I haven't heard about, that kind of just stumbled across it, surprises me in the quality of the music, but the consistency of it is it's very one note, and they build the story around it. It's nice, but if they would have just a couple other levels with maybe some free music, maybe some Beethoven symphonies, some cello suites or something like that, it might change the pace a little bit away from this constant kind of headache of a beat. But I've actually played this game for 2 or 3 hours on end before. I find myself constantly coming back to it for just 15 or 20-minute bites, and every single time I play it, I always have a great time, even on the levels that I've already played before. It kind of feels cool that I can jump back into it and have that feeling of muscle memory, kind of in the same way. And I keep bringing it back to John Wick, because even though you'll see in this video I don't look like John Wick when I'm playing, you still feel like that. And it's one of those things like John McClane or John Wick or anything like that, where they bring him back into the action and they kind of just snap right back into it. So even if you haven't played the game in a few months and then you jump back into it and you play a level that you haven't played before, in the same way that when you play Guitar Hero, you kind of just feel it out, and it comes right back into it. It does the same thing, but it does it in this combat-oriented scenario, so that it feels like you're almost John Wick just jumping back into it. Like, I can't believe I got dragged back into this. So I highly recommend this game. If you have any VR headsets, play this game. If you have a lot of space, even more so if you don't have a lot of space and you want to feel like you're playing a pretty athletic or hectic VR game, go for it. Or if you just want to show people what VR is capable of, and kind of the world-breaking, the world-changing sense that it has, and the power trip that you can't get out of VR, this is the one. Half-Life Alyx looks great and it plays cool with a nice story. You have your other games like Megaton Rainfall that it's clunky, but you still have that power trip in there. But really, this kind of brings all of that together into what VR is known the best for so far, which is basically rhythm-based games with hectic combat. And that's what this is. This is really the ultimate kind of bringing together of your super hot style of graphics, your simple graphics that really evoke a certain imagery, your gunplay that you see in other games like Pavlov and VR, and then the soundtracks that you expect from this future retro kind of game. So give it a shot. I highly recommend it. This is particularly the game that I think shows what VR is capable of, because it utilizes it as a separate platform rather than trying to fit the current narratives of video games, your Modern Warfares, your Half-Life style shooters, your platformers, they have that Moss game that's just a basic platformer, you have a different kind of view on it. All of that, it throws all out the window and creates its own style of game framed around what VR can do. So check it out and let me know in the comments if you agree once you do check it out. Otherwise, subscribe if you like this video, and we'll see you later.